I stood on the porch with my keys cold in my hand, listening to a woman laugh behind my door like she owned the deed. I did not knock. I simply stepped back to watch the shadows move. It was barely 2 in the afternoon, but I knew that by 5 o'clock, they expected me to sign away my life. That laughter was not happiness. It was the sound of a crime in progress. My name is Brooke Callahan, and at 34 years old, I thought I understood the architecture of my life perfectly. I stood on the front porch of my home in Westgate Cove, a structure of brick and cedar that I paid the mortgage on every first of the month. I had returned early from a compliance audit in Chicago, skipping the final dinner to surprise my husband. I stood there with my keys in my hand, ready to unlock the door, when the sound stopped me cold. It was a laugh. It was distinct, feminine, and it came from inside my living room. I froze. My hand hovered over the brass handle. The laughter was followed by a voice I knew better than my own. "Ethan Mercer, my husband." "Stop it," Ethan said, his voice low and rumbling, the kind of tone he used when he wanted to be intimate. "You're going to spill the wine. It's fine." A woman's voice replied. It was light, airy, and completely comfortable. Besides, this rug is ugly anyway. I felt a physical blow to my chest, but I did not gasp. I did not shove the key into the lock to confront them. In my line of work, you do not charge into a burning building without assessing the structural integrity first. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, then another. I moved silently off the wooden porch and positioned myself behind the large decorative hedge that lined the walkway. My hands were steady as I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket. I opened the smart home security app and tapped on the living room feed. The video loaded in high definition. There they were. Ethan was standing by the kitchen island, holding 2 crystal flutes, and walking past him, trailing a hand along his shoulder, was a woman with cascading blonde hair. She was wearing my robe, the silk charcoal one I had purchased for our 5th anniversary. She wore it loosely, the belt tied with a careless knot, walking through my home as if she held the deed. I pressed the side buttons on my phone. The screen flashed. I took 3 more screenshots in rapid succession, capturing their faces, the timestamp, and the bottle of vintage wine on the counter. I opened my file manager, created a new folder, and named it Receipts. I moved the photos into the encrypted vault. This was no longer a marriage. It was a case file. I watched the screen as Ethan set the glass down and pulled her close. I needed to hear one more thing. I needed to know the scope of the damage. I turned the volume up on my phone, holding it to my ear. "Are you sure?" "She won't be back early," the woman asked, her voice sounding tinny through the device speaker. Ethan laughed, a sound that lacked any guilt. "Brooke is reliable. She never deviates from her schedule. She's probably organizing a spreadsheet right now." He paused, kissing her neck, and then he said the words that turned my shock into ice. "Don't worry about the timeline," Ethan murmured. "By 5 o'clock. I just need her to sign the papers, and then it's done. By 5 o'clock. I looked at my watch. It was barely 2 in the afternoon. They were not just having an affair. They were counting down the minutes until they could use me. He needed a signature. That meant this was financial. I closed the app. I did not cry. Tears are a reaction, and I was already moving past reaction into strategy. I walked down the driveway, keeping my head low, and continued 2 blocks down the street until I was out of sight of the house. I stopped under the shade of an oak tree and summoned a ride-sharing car. While I waited, I typed a text message to Ethan. My fingers moved with mechanical precision. "Flight delayed. Stuck on the tarmac. Will be home late." I hit send. I watched the text status change to delivered. A moment later, 3 dots appeared. "Oh no. That sucks. Babe. Hurry home. I miss you." I stared at the lie glowing on my screen. I climbed into the back of the sedan when it arrived and told the driver to take me to a hotel downtown. As we drove away, I looked back toward the subdivision one last time. Ethan thought he was directing a private play behind closed doors. He had no idea that I had just bought a ticket to the show. If they wanted a performance, I would give them one, but I would not be the wife who signs blindly at 5 o'clock. I would be the one who burns the script right when the audience is watching. My official title is Head of Operations at Larkspur Risk and Logistics. Companies pay my firm 6 figures a year to identify structural weaknesses in their supply chains and eliminate them before the entire system collapses. I am paid to see the cracks that others ignore. I am paid to be suspicious. Yet, as I sat in the back seat of that car, watching the familiar streets of my neighborhood blur past the window, I realized the irony was bitter enough to choke on. I had spent a decade fixing broken systems for strangers while living inside a catastrophic failure of my own making. My marriage to Ethan Mercer was not a partnership. It was a deceptive business merger where I provided the capital and labor, and he provided the public relations. Ethan had always cultivated an image of harmless neutrality. He was the guy who never raised his voice, the man who shrugged when the waiter brought the wrong order, the husband who let his wife make all the decisions. For years, I mistook his passivity for kindness. I was wrong. Ethan practiced a very specific brand of weaponized incompetence. If the taxes needed to be filed, he claimed the forms were too confusing. If the gutters needed cleaning, he hurt his back. If a difficult conversation needed to happen, he suddenly had a headache. Don't make a big deal out of it. Brooke was his favorite phrase. He used it like a shield. It's just a little mistake, he would say when he overdrew our joint account. You're so much better at talking to people, he would insist when I had to fire the contractor he hired without checking references. And then there was his mother, Marilyn Mercer. If Ethan was the negligent employee, Marilyn was the toxic CEO who refused to step down. She ruled through a terrifying blend of Southern charm and absolute viciousness. She never criticized me directly. She only offered helpful observations. She would run a finger over my mantle and smile. Oh, Brooke, you must be so busy at work to let the dust get this bad. I admire your priorities. I became the machine that kept their lives running. I organized the holiday parties, cooked the turkeys, bought the gifts, and managed the investments. During our annual summer barbecue, I would be in the kitchen sweating over a hot stove while Ethan stood on the patio with a beer, accepting compliments on his beautiful home. But it was not his home. That was the one detail they could not smile away. And it was the detail that likely led to the woman in my robe today. The house in Westgate Cove was purchased with money from a trust my late father established. When we bought it, my lawyer insisted on a strict separation of assets. The deed was in the trust's name. I remembered the day clearly. We sat in the title office, surrounded by stacks of paper. Ethan had looked at the waiver of marital interest, the document that stated he had no claim to the property, and he had laughed. I don't need to read all this legal jargon. He had said, waving his pen dismissively, I trust you, babe. Where do I sign? He signed it because he was lazy. He signed it because he assumed he could charm his way into ownership later. He signed it because he never believed I would ever actually enforce a contract against him. Now, I realized that Marilyn and Ethan had been running tests on me for years. They were stress testing my compliance. It started small. Marilyn would shove a permission slip or a tax document under my nose while I was on a conference call. Just scribble your name here. Dear, she would whisper urgently. We need to get this in the mail. Right now. And I would sign. I signed because I was on a call. I signed because I wanted them to leave me alone. I signed because I was terrified of being seen as difficult or ungrateful. I had trained them to believe that if they created enough pressure and enough noise, I would sign anything just to restore the peace. That was the plan for 5 o'clock today. They were counting on the Brooke algorithm. They expected me to walk in, exhausted from my trip, find a surprise party or a crisis manufacturing by Marilyn, and be handed a stack of papers with a pen already uncapped. Just sign this. It's for the insurance adjustment, Ethan would say. Don't make a scene. In front of the guests, Marilyn would add, and the woman in the kitchen. Tessa, if I remembered the voice correctly. She was there to be the audience. She was there to distract me, or perhaps to witness the victory. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage. They thought they were dealing with the wife who just wanted everyone to get along. They forgot that at Larkspur Risk and Logistics, when we find a redundant, expensive, and damaging component in the system, we do not fix it. We liquidate it. The laughter behind that door was not an affair. It was the sound of my husband and his mother starting a hostile takeover. They just did not realize the board of directors had returned early to vote. I checked into the nearest hotel, a generic chain with beige walls and sealed windows that faced the highway. I did not unpack. I placed my laptop on the small mahogany desk, connected to the secure Wi-Fi via my personal hotspot, and began the digital autopsy of my life. I logged into my secondary email account, the one I used exclusively for property taxes and trust documents. It was a clean inbox, usually silent, but today it was screaming. There was a notification from a secure document portal. Subject document viewed. I clicked the details. The document had been accessed at 1:30 in the afternoon. At 1:30. I was 30,000 feet in the air somewhere over Ohio. I certainly had not clicked it. You couldn't even wait until I landed, I whispered to the empty room, my voice tight. I opened my identity protection app next. The screen flashed red. Alert, new hard inquiry detected. My credit file, which I had frozen 3 years ago after a data breach, had been unlocked. To lift a freeze, you need a PIN or the answers to security questions. Ethan knew the name of my first golden retriever. He knew the street I grew up on. He had used our shared history to pick the lock on my financial future. I navigated to the shared family calendar, but it was empty. Ethan was careful to keep his tracks hidden there, but Marilyn was arrogant. I checked the deleted items in the email trash, a folder Ethan rarely emptied because he assumed I never looked there. There it was. A confirmation from Prestige Mobile Notaries. Appointment confirmed today at 5 o'clock. Location Westgate Cove. Requester Marilyn Mercer. I scanned the attendee list. Marilyn Mercer, Ethan Mercer, Brooke Callahan. My name was wedged between theirs like a piece of property they intended to trade. They had not just invited a notary, they had summoned an executioner for my bank account. I switched tabs to the router log I could access remotely. The device that opened the secure link was labeled Living Room Tablet. That was the iPad Ethan used to watch sports highlights on the sofa. He had been sitting there, likely with Tessa, reviewing the documents they needed me to sign. The sentence I heard outside the door replayed in my mind. By 5 o'clock, I just need her to sign the papers. It fit perfectly. But there was one variable they could not control my willingness. What if I said no? What if I refused to produce my driver's license for the notary? A legitimate notary requires a physical ID? I opened the feed for the internal security camera in our home office. It was a small, unobtrusive lens on the bookshelf that I used to check on the cleaning crew. The room was empty, but the desk was cluttered. I zoomed in on a yellow legal pad sitting next to Ethan's gaming mouse. The resolution was high definition. I could read the handwriting as clearly as if I were holding the paper. It was Ethan's scrawl, a hasty checklist. Wine, music playlist, notary ask if copy ID is okay. I stared at the screen. My breath hitched, a sharp intake of air that hurt my lungs. Ask if copy ID is okay, I said aloud. The words tasting like ash. You were going to force it through. That line changed everything. Asking if a copy is acceptable implies they expected resistance, or worse, they expected me to be too intoxicated or too distracted to find my purse. They planned to charm or coerce the notary into accepting a photocopy of my license that I kept in the file cabinet. This was not just pressure, this was fraud. This was a conspiracy to commit forgery if the original plan failed. I did not cry. I did not throw the lamp against the wall. I opened a new spreadsheet. I created columns: time, actor, action, evidence. 1:30 in the afternoon, document accessed via Ethan's tablet. 2:14 in the afternoon, credit freeze lifted using security answers. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, scheduled notary arrival. I typed with the rhythm of a machine. They had a plan to rob me. I had a plan to catch them. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and forced my breathing to slow down. If I stormed into that house right now, I would walk into a domestic dispute. The police would come, take a report, and tell us it was a civil matter. Ethan would claim it was a misunderstanding. Marilyn would clutch her pearls and call me hysterical. I would lose the element of surprise. And more importantly, I would lose the evidence of intent. I needed them to think the plan was still in motion. I needed them to feel safe enough to put their names on a crime. I picked up my phone and dialed Ethan. I let it ring 3 times, counting the seconds, before he answered. "Hey, babe," he said. His voice was breathless, slightly elevated, the tone of a man trying to sound casual while his heart rate was up. "Ethan," I said, making my voice sound thin and exhausted. "I'm still at the airport. Delay after delay. Listen, Mrs. Gable next door texted me. She said she heard loud voices. Did you invite extra people over? It was a lie. Mrs. Gable was in Florida for the winter, but I needed to see how easily he could reconstruct reality." "Oh, that," Ethan said, letting out a chuckle that sounded like dry leaves scraping together. No guests. It's just Mom. She came over early to, supervise. She's moving furniture around for the party tonight. She's being loud. You know how she gets." "Right," I whispered. "Just your mom." "Yeah. Look, just get here when you can," he said, rushing the words. "By 5 o'clock, everything will be done. We just need you for the main event. By 5 o'clock, there it was again. The deadline. Okay." "I'll try," I said, and hung up. My hands were steady now. I opened my messages and texted Marilyn. I kept the tone submissive, the dutiful daughter-in-law begging for forgiveness. "I'm so sorry. Marilyn, work crisis. I'm running late, but I promise I'll be there before dessert is served. Please don't be mad." The reply came in 10 seconds. "Fine. Just get here. Don't embarrass the family in front of our guests. We have a schedule to keep." She did not care if I was safe. She only cared if I was presentable and authorized to sign. I swiped back to the screenshots I had taken from the security camera. I zoomed in on the woman's face. In the moment of shock, I had only registered her as the intruder. Now, looking at the sharp jawline and the expensive highlights, recognition clicked into place like a loaded magazine. It was Tessa Monroe. She was not just a random woman Ethan had met at a bar. She was a member of Marilyn's church group. She styled herself as a wealth management consultant for high-net-worth families. I had seen her at the Christmas gala last year, whispering in Marilyn's ear, looking at my jewelry with hungry eyes. This was not a crime of passion. This was a crime of opportunity. Marilyn had brought in a specialist. Tessa was there to handle the paperwork, to reassure the notary, and to probably take a cut of the loan proceeds. If they wanted a party. I decided I would give them one. I opened the family group chat, which included Ethan, Marilyn, and several cousins. I began typing a message that would seal the exits to the trap. Good news. Since I'm late and feeling terrible about ruining the vibe, I invited a few VIPs to join us for dinner. They are in town, and I want to impress them. Let's show them some Mercer hospitality. I did not wait for a reply. I sent individual invites to 3 specific people. First, Arthur Henderson, a local angel investor who prided himself on ethical business practices. Second, Sarah Jenkins, a senior risk officer at the bank Ethan used. And third, David Thorne, a brutal litigator I went to law school with who specialized in fraud cases. I told them it was an intimate networking dinner and that I had a surprise announcement regarding the property. I set the phone down. Ethan and Marilyn thought I was rushing home to serve appetizers and smooth over the cracks in their evening. They thought I was coming back to be the wife, The victim, the signature, they were wrong. I was not coming home to host a party. I was coming home to secure a conviction. I booked the next shuttle flight to Pittsburgh, a 40-minute hop that cost me a premium I did not mind paying. My trust was managed by Sterling and Vale Trustees, a firm that specialized in protecting generational wealth from volatility. Today, however, the volatility was not the market. It was my husband. I walked into the glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor, where Graham Vance was already waiting. He was a man of few words and sharp suits, the kind of attorney who viewed emotions as inefficient data points. Graham slid a black folder across the polished mahogany table. He did not offer me coffee. He knew why I was there. "We flagged the activity at 9 o'clock this morning," Graham said, opening the file to reveal a stack of high-resolution printouts. A request was submitted through the expedited portal for a home equity line of credit against the Westgate property. The principal amount requested is $280,000. I looked at the number. $280,000. It was almost exactly the amount of equity the house had accrued over the last 5 years. They were not just skimming, they were gutting the asset. "Show me the signature," I said. Graham flipped to the second page. At the bottom, in blue ink, was my name. To the untrained eye, it was perfect, but I knew my hand, and Graham knew forensic document examination. "It is a digital composite," Graham explained, pointing to the pixelation at the curve of the B. "See the pressure. It is uniform throughout the entire stroke. When a human signs, the pressure varies. This was traced or lifted from an old PDF, and look at the timestamp. This was uploaded at 10:45 yesterday morning. I was in a compliance briefing in Chicago at 10:45, I said, my voice steady. Exactly, Graham replied. But here is the catch. The bank's algorithm flagged the discrepancy in the IP address. They paused the disbursement pending a wet signature verification. That is why they need a notary. He pulled out a document titled Confirmation of Prior Signature. They don't just need you to sign new papers. Brooke, Graham said, leaning forward. They need you to sign this affidavit stating that the digital signature submitted yesterday was valid. They need you to retroactively legalize their fraud. If you sign this in front of a notary, the bank releases the funds within an hour. The picture was now complete. The party, the guests, the pressure regarding family honor, it was all a pressure chamber. They were banking on the social contract. They knew I would never cause a scene in front of guests. They expected me to smile, drink the wine, and sign the routine paperwork to avoid embarrassing Marilyn. We should call the police right now, Graham said, reaching for his phone. This is attempted grand larceny and identity theft. No, I said. Graham paused, his hand hovering over the receiver. Brooke, they are trying to steal $250,000 from you. If we call the police now, Ethan will claim it was a misunderstanding. He will say he thought I authorized it. He will say he was just trying to surprise me with an investment opportunity, I said. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the steel-gray city. I need them to go through with it. I need the notary to open his book. I need Ethan to hand me the pen. I need the intent to be undeniable. I turned back to Graham. Put a fraud lock on the disbursement at the trust level. On their end, make the system look green. Let the notary get the confirmation code. Let them think the money is on its way, but I want the transfer blocked internally. Graham nodded slowly, a hint of a smile touching his lips. A silent trap. I can do that. The funds will show as pending release, but will never leave the secure account. Good, I said. And I need a certified copy of this dossier, the IP logs, the timestamp mismatches, the forgery analysis. Put it all in a sealed envelope. Graham began typing on his laptop. I am also filing a preemptive notice with the Allegheny County District Attorney's Office regarding potential identity theft. If things go sideways tonight, this establishes a paper trail that predates the event. I took the envelope he handed me 10 minutes later. It felt heavy, Not with paper, but with the weight of the end of my life as I knew it. I left the office and took the elevator down to the street. I was not going back to Westgate Cove to save my marriage. I was not going back to argue or to cry or to ask why. I was going back to terminate a business partnership that had violated its contract. I checked my watch. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. I had 90 minutes to get back, get dressed, and prepare the stage. They wanted a signature. I would give them a verdict. I did not drive straight home. I parked my rental car in the lot of a 24-hour diner 3 miles from Westgate Cove, turning the passenger seat into a temporary command post. In my line of work, execution is nothing without documentation, and I was about to create a paper trail so dense it would suffocate them. My first move was digital preservation. I knew Ethan, if things went wrong, his instinct would be to wipe the system. I opened my laptop and accessed the admin panel of our home security network. I rerouted the live feed from the local cloud storage to a secure, off-site server hosted by Larkspur Risk and Logistics. I had to call a favor in from our IT director to open the port. Now, every motion, every sound, and every conversation in that house was being mirrored to a vault Ethan could not touch, even if he smashed the cameras with a hammer. The footage would survive. Next came the catering. Marilyn had explicitly forbidden outside food because she believed a good wife cooked from scratch, and also because she refused to pay for professional service. I pulled up the contact for the most expensive bistro in town and placed an order for 30 covers. Expedited delivery. I requested it to arrive exactly at 5 o'clock. This served a dual purpose. It would keep the guests' mouths busy, and it would deprive Marilyn of the satisfaction of seeing me sweating in the kitchen. Then, I made the most critical call of the afternoon. I contacted a process server I had used for corporate hostile takeovers. I need you at the door at 5:12 in the afternoon. I told him, my voice flat. Not 5:10, not 5:15, 5:12. That is, a very specific window. He replied, "The notary arrives at 5, I explained. By 5:12, the documents will be on the table and the pen will be in hand. That is when I need you to ring the doorbell." I hung up and turned my attention to the stack of stationery I had purchased at an office supply store on the way. 30 yellow envelopes. High quality, heavy stock. I printed out 30 copies of a single sheet of paper. I called it the tasting menu. It was a summary of the credit inquiry, the timestamp of the forged signature upload, and the IP address log matching Ethan's tablet. At the bottom of the page, I printed a large QR code. When scanned, it led directly to the encrypted receipts folder containing the video of them laughing, the audio of the poison threat, and the full forensic report from Graham Vance. I took a black calligraphy pen and wrote the name of each guest on the outside of the envelopes. Arthur Henderson, Sarah Jenkins, David Thorne. I even wrote one for Ethan and one for Marilyn. By personalizing them, I ensured curiosity would override etiquette. When you see your name on an envelope, you open it. I checked the time. It was 4:15. I made one final adjustment to the smart home system. I navigated to the user access permissions. Marilyn had a permanent code for the side door. I did not delete it. Instead, I set an expiration timer. User Marilyn Mercer. Access status active. Auto revoke today at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. I wanted her to get in. I wanted her to feel like she owned the place. But once the clock struck 6 and the trap snapped shut, her key code would be dead. She would be locked out of my home forever. I called the bank contact number listed on the HELOC application one last time. "I'm calling to check the status of the Mercer application." I said, "It is currently pending notarization," the agent replied. "Once the notary uploads the confirmation, the funds release." "Perfect." I said, "Everything is right on schedule." I closed the laptop. I adjusted my rearview mirror and looked at my own reflection. I applied a fresh coat of lipstick, a shade darker than I usually wore. I looked into my own eyes and rehearsed the line I would deliver when the curtain fell. "This isn't a family," I whispered to the glass. testing the weight of the words. This is a fraud. I started the engine. It was time to go home. I walked through the front door at exactly 5 o'clock. I was not wearing the pastel dress or the frantic expression of a wife rushing to salvage a dinner party. I was wearing my charcoal-tailored suit, the one I wore to fire executives, and 4-inch heels that clicked against the hardwood floor with the rhythm of a gavel. The house was already buzzing. Marilyn was standing in the center of the foyer, directing the flow of traffic like an air traffic controller in pearls. She spotted me instantly. Her eyes narrowed, scanning my outfit, realizing I had not come to cook. "Brooke," Marilyn said, gliding over with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You're finally here. The candles in the dining room are crooked, and the lighting is terrible. It looks like a funeral home in here." She glanced at her watch for the 3rd time in under a minute. She did not care about the candles. She was timing the execution. "I'm sure you fixed it." "Marilyn," I replied, my voice smooth. "You always do." Before I could step further, Ethan appeared. He slipped his arm around my waist, pulling me into his side. To the guests, it looked like a loving embrace. To me, it felt like a shackle. His fingers dug into my hip bone, hard enough to bruise. "You made it," Ethan said, kissing my temple. He lowered his voice so only I could hear, his breath hot against my ear. "You look intense. Don't make a scene." "Brooke, just smile and nod. I'm just happy to be home." "Darling," I said, looking up at him with a wide, vacuous smile. He relaxed slightly, thinking the programming held. We moved into the living room, and that was when I saw her, Tessa Monroe. She was standing near the fireplace, holding a glass of my wine, talking to Arthur Henderson. She was wearing a dress that was slightly too formal for a house party, shimmering under the lights. "Oh, the layout is wonderful," I heard Tessa say. "We really think it's the best feature of the house. It's practically our place for entertaining, our place." My stomach tightened, but I did not flinch. I caught Arthur's eye and nodded. He looked confused by Tessa's phrasing, but he smiled back. Marilyn tapped a spoon against her champagne flute. The room quieted down. She stood at the head of the room, looking every bit the matriarch of a dynasty she did not own. "I just want to propose a toast," Marilyn announced, raising her glass. "To my son, Ethan, for his vision, and to Brooke, for being the supportive rock in the background, for knowing when to step back and let the real work happen. To family, to family." The room echoed. They were toasting to my silence. They were applauding my erasure. I took a sip of water, my eyes locked on Marilyn over the rim of the glass. I moved to the dining room. Marilyn had rearranged the seating chart, of course. My place card was set at the far end of the table, closest to the kitchen swing door. It was the seat for the help, the person who needs to jump up to refill water glasses. It was an insult, but it was also a tactical error. That seat was directly beneath the high-fidelity microphone of the kitchen security camera. I sat down. Ethan took the seat at the head of the table, acting the part of the lord of the manor. He checked his phone under the table, his leg bouncing nervously. He leaned toward me, pretending to adjust my napkin. "The notary is 3 minutes late," he hissed. "When the doorbell rings, you go to the kitchen. We'll do it on the island. Fast. I'm always prepared." "Ethan," I said. I patted the heavy stack of documents inside my bag, but I did not pull them out yet. Not yet. I looked across the table at Tessa, then at Marilyn. The air in the room shifted. It went from the warm buzz of a cocktail party to the heavy, static charge of a storm front. Ethan looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the flicker of genuine fear behind his glasses. The laughter from the living room continued, but it sounded hollow now, like pennies rattling in a tin can. They thought they were waiting for dessert. They had no idea they were sitting in a courtroom. The catering staff was just beginning to clear the main course plates when I stood up. The room fell silent. the kind of heavy, expectant silence that usually precedes a toast or a confession. I reached into my bag and pulled out the stack of 30 yellow envelopes, holding them like a deck of cards. "Before dessert is served," I said, my voice clear and projecting to the back of the room, "I have a little gift for everyone. Think of it as a menu for the future." I did not hand them out randomly. I walked over to Arthur Henderson first. He was the investor whose reputation relied on judging character. I placed the yellow envelope on his placemat. Next was Sarah Jenkins, the risk officer, then David Thorne. I worked my way down the line, saving the family for last. Marilyn beamed at me, mistaking my strategy for submission. She thought I was distributing thank you notes or perhaps gift cards, a final desperate attempt to buy my way into her good graces. "Oh, Brooke," Marilyn said, clutching her pearls, "you really didn't have to do this, but it's sweet that you're finally trying." Ethan, however, was not smiling. He stared at the envelope in front of Arthur. He looked at the one in front of Sarah. The color was draining from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ash-gray color. He knew me. He knew I did not give gifts without a reason. Just as I placed the final envelope on the table, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, intrusive sound that cut through the tension. The mobile notary. Right on time. Marilyn practically leaped from her chair, her eyes bright with victory. "That must be the guest of honor," she announced, moving toward me. She reached for my elbow, her grip tight and painful. "Come along, Brooke. Let's go to the kitchen and sign those papers so we can enjoy the cake." I looked at her hand on my arm, then up at her face. I did not move. I planted my feet on the hardwood floor and pulled my arm away with a sharp jerk. "No," I said. Marilyn froze. "Excuse me. We aren't going to the kitchen," I said, pitching my voice so that every person in the room could hear. "We can sign everything right here, in front of the family, in front of the investors. We have nothing to hide, do we?" Ethan scrambled out of his chair, knocking his wine glass over. Red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth like a wound. "Brooke, stop," Ethan said, rushing to my side. He turned to the guests, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "She's exhausted. The travel. It messes with her head. She's confused." "I am not confused, Ethan," I said calmly. "You're having an episode," Marilyn hissed, stepping in front of me to block the guest's view. She turned to the room, her smile stretched thin and terrifying. She gets like this when she's stressed, paralyzed by hysteria. "Please, just ignore her. Ethan, take her to the kitchen." The guests shifted in their seats. I saw doubt in Arthur's eyes. They were good at this. They had spent years painting me as the fragile, lucky wife. For a second, the narrative wobbled. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply pointed a finger at the yellow envelopes resting on the table. "If I am having an episode," I said, my voice dropping to a register of absolute, cold sanity, "then the documents inside those envelopes are a hallucination. But if they are real, then the people standing next to me are criminals. Open them. And then, you decide who is telling the truth." There was a pause, a heartbeat of hesitation. Arthur Henderson was the first to move. He picked up the envelope with his name on it and tore the seal. The sound of ripping paper was deafening in the quiet room. He pulled out the single sheet of paper and adjusted his glasses. He read the first line, then the second. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Ethan. "Unauthorized credit inquiry." Arthur read aloud, his tone flat, "Originating from device. Mercer Home Network. Date, yesterday." He looked at Ethan with a mixture of confusion and disgust. "Ethan, this says you accessed her credit freeze using security questions. Why would you bypass your own wife?" "It's a mistake," Ethan shouted, his voice cracking. "It's a glitch." At the other end of the table, David Thorne had already pulled out his phone. He scanned the QR code printed at the bottom of the page. A moment later, a tinny, recorded voice drifted from his speaker, faint but unmistakable. By 5 o'clock. I just need her to sign the papers, and then it's done. David looked up, his face grim. He looked at me, then at the notary who was now standing awkwardly in the archway of the dining room. "That is Ethan's voice," David said. "And that is a conspiracy to commit fraud." The atmosphere in the room shattered. The warmth of the dinner party evaporated, replaced instantly by the cold, harsh light of a tribunal. They were no longer guests eating my food. They were witnesses viewing the evidence. I looked at Marilyn. Her mouth opened and closed, but for the first time in her life, she had absolutely nothing to say. The man standing in the doorway is not here to witness a standard refinance, I said, turning to face the confused notary. He is here because at 10:45 yesterday morning, someone uploaded a document with my signature on it, a signature that I did not write. He is here to trick me into signing an affidavit that makes that forgery legal. The notary, a middle-aged man holding a leather binder, looked from me to Marilyn with wide, panicked eyes. I was told all parties were in agreement, the notary stammered, taking a step back. I was told this was a formality. Marilyn lunged toward him, her hand outstretched like a claw. "Get back in the kitchen," she shrieked, abandoning her poise entirely. "This is private. Go back to the kitchen." But it was too late. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. I had Graham Vance on speed dial, and I put him on speaker at maximum volume. "Graham," I said, "you are on with the room. What is the status of the account?" Graham's voice filled the dining room, dry and clinical, cutting through the emotional heat like a scalpel. "The fraud lock is active. Brooke. The trust has flagged the attempted withdrawal of $280,000. We have forwarded the IP logs and the signature analysis to the fraud division of the district attorney's office. If anyone attempts to execute that notary block tonight, they are acting as an accessory to a felony." Ethan flinched as if he had been struck. "District attorney," he whispered. "But who did it?" Arthur Henderson asked, his voice low. I pointed to the television screen mounted on the wall, which was currently displaying a slideshow of family photos. With a swipe of my phone, I cast a new image to the screen. It was a server log. "This is the access log for the secure portal," I explained. "The device that uploaded the forged signature is labeled Ethan's tablet. It is connected to this Wi-Fi network. It is not a hacker in another country. It is the man sitting at the head of this table." Tessa Monroe stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She looked like a trapped animal. "I have nothing to do with this," she said, her voice trembling. "I am just a consultant. I was just offering financial advice." "Sit down, Tessa," I said. I tapped my phone again. A new image appeared on the screen. It was an email from Tessa to Marilyn, dated 3 days ago. Subject verbiage for affidavit. Body. Make sure she signs the confirmation of prior signature exactly as attached. If she hesitates, tell her it is standard bank policy. We need to clear the liens before the audit. You weren't consulting, I said. You were scripting the con. Marilyn slammed her hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "How dare you!" she screamed, her face mottled with red rage. "We are family. We do what is necessary to survive. You have plenty of money. You are just selfish. You are trying to destroy this family." "Marilyn," a calm voice interrupted. It was Sarah Jenkins, the risk officer from the bank. She was not looking at the evidence. She was looking at Marilyn with professional pity. "If you are taking out high-interest equity lines to cover old debts, do you have active liens against you right now?" Marilyn's mouth snapped shut. The silence was absolute. In that quiet, the sound of the front door opening was deafening. A man in a cheap windbreaker walked into the dining room. He did not look like a guest. He looked like business. He checked the photograph in his hand and then looked at the table. "Ethan Mercer," the man asked. Ethan did not answer. He was slumped in his chair, staring at the tablecloth. And Marilyn Mercer. Marilyn turned away, refusing to acknowledge him. The process server did not care about social niceties. He walked to the table and dropped 2 thick stacks of documents right in the center, between the roast beef and the gravy boat. The thud they made was heavy and final. "You have been served," he said. Ethan looked at the papers. Divorce filings, emergency orders for exclusive occupancy of the residence, civil lawsuits for fraud and conversion. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. His mask of the easygoing husband completely dissolved. "Brooke, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. I was scared. Mom said, she said we would lose everything. Don't do this in front of everyone." I looked at him. I looked at the guests who were now standing, gathering their coats, desperate to escape the blast radius of this disaster. I thought about the text he sent me, telling me he missed me while he poured wine for his mistress. "I am not negotiating," I said. I picked up my glass of water and took a sip, looking over the rim at the wreckage of my dinner party. "The laughter behind the door tonight," I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "It was because they thought I wouldn't dare open it. They were wrong." The dining room was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the shallow, panicked breathing of my husband. I stood at the head of the table, not as a hostess, but as the trustee of the estate. "Let me be absolutely clear," I said, looking from Ethan to Marilyn. "This house is the sole property of the Callahan Trust. All assets associated with it are currently frozen. The bank has been notified, the title company has been alerted, and the police have the IP logs. Any further attempt to sign a document regarding this property will be treated as an act of wire fraud." I reached into the folder the process server had dropped on the table and pulled out a specific document with a red stamp on the top corner. "This is an order for emergency exclusive occupancy," I said, sliding it toward Ethan. "The judge signed it an hour ago based on the evidence of financial abuse and potential dissipation of assets. It means you have exactly 2 hours to pack a bag and vacate the premises. If you are still here at 8 o'clock, the sheriff's deputies will remove you." Marilyn stood up, her face twisted into a mask of ugly desperation. She looked around the room, seeking an ally, but finding only judgment. "You ungrateful little girl," Marilyn spat, her voice shaking with rage. "After everything I did for you, I welcomed you into this family. I treated you like a daughter, and this is how you repay us by humiliating us in front of friends." She turned to Arthur Henderson, extending a hand. "Arthur, tell her she's being unreasonable." Arthur did not take her hand. He stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and looked at Marilyn with a cold, detached expression. "I think I've seen enough," Arthur said. He walked toward the door without another word. Sarah Jenkins followed him. Then David Thorne. Then the rest of the guests. They did not say goodbye. They did not thank me for the dinner. They simply filed out in a terrifying, heavy silence. The sound of their car doors slamming outside was the final verdict on the Mercer reputation. I turned my attention to the notary, who was still clutching his binder against his chest. "Sir," I said softly, "you were invited here to facilitate a crime. You are currently standing in the middle of a conspiracy investigation. If I were you, I would leave before the police arrive to take statements. The notary did not need to be told twice." He turned and practically ran out the front door, leaving the 3 of them, Ethan, Marilyn, and Tessa, alone with me in the wreckage of their scheme. Ethan put his head in his hands and began to sob. It was a pathetic, wet sound. "It was her idea," Ethan cried, pointing a trembling finger at his mother. "She told me we needed the money. She said you wouldn't mind. She said it was just temporary." "You coward," Marilyn shrieked, turning on him. "You're the one who gambled away your savings. You're the one who begged me to fix it, and you She glared at me. You drove him to this. You were always so cold. So obsessed with your career. I watched them turn on each other. It was inevitable. Rats always bite each other when the ship starts to sink. I am not going to argue with you, I said, picking up the remaining yellow envelopes from the table. I don't negotiate with criminals. I file charges. I walked over to the smart home panel mounted on the wall near the kitchen. They watched me, paralyzed. I tapped the screen and navigated to the admin settings. I deleted Marilyn's code. I deleted Ethan's code. I entered a new master sequence. The system beeped a sharp, high-pitched tone that signaled the locks had reset. The codes are changed, I said. Once you walk out that door tonight, you will never walk back in. But where will you go? Tessa asked, her voice small. You can't stay here alone. I looked at her, and for the first time, I smiled. It was a genuine smile. I'm not staying here, I said. I accepted a transfer to the Pittsburgh branch this morning. I'm leaving the state. I'm selling the house as soon as the litigation clears. I am cutting every single tie that binds me to this town and to these people. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The night air rushed in, cool and clean. I stood on the threshold, the exact spot where I had stood hours ago, trembling with a key in my hand. Ethan was still crying at the table. Marilyn was staring at the wall, her dynasty in ruins. I got home unexpectedly, I said, my voice steady and final. I didn't tell my husband I returned. I heard her laugh behind our door, and I made sure the whole town heard the truth behind that laughter. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. I heard the deadbolt slide into place with a heavy, metallic thud. It was the sound of a book closing, the sound of a life ending and a better one beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment down below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Victoria Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.